Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5-Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Here we are, Rush Nation. We're 1 day away from the fantasy football semi-finals, and we're literally just 2 weeks away from ending our fantasy seasons. I'm back. I should apologise. There was no pods last week. I did put a message out there. You could probably hear it in my throat. I literally couldn't talk. I couldn't do anything. Couldn't get out of bed. So I've been really unwell with whatever this winter thing going around is. So, it's caught me off guard, and unfortunately meant that I spent all weekend and most of last week in bed. So, slightly better. I'll go for as long as I can go now, but it's a key point in the year. So I wanted to get out some really quick waiver wires based on last night's games. Probably the top priority ad this week, if he's out there on any of your if he's on any of your waiver wires, is Jerome Ford. So Jerome, obviously Nick Chubb broke his foot last night. He's out for the season. If you didn't know that, then that's what happened. And if you did, you probably would already have added Jerome Ford. When he came in, he got 9 touches, 104 yards and a touchdown. So put up a good amount of fantasy points, over 18 fantasy points yesterday. And so as a result, Jerome Ford becomes a top priority ad, and all that strategy that we've talked about for weeks of having these guys, it is unfortunately for situations like this. So Jerome Ford becomes a high priority ad, and one that you need to definitely put on your radars this week. And he's worth emptying the budget for. I don't think they run the ball quite as much, but Nick Chubb never looked right. He never really looked like he was sort of the Nick Chubb of old, and definitely looked like he was affected. And Jerome Ford looked pretty good yesterday when running the football. So I think I think you would expect him to do better than Nick Chubb has done, but maybe not the high ceiling plays. But nevertheless, it's a starting RB2 that you can pick up on the waiver wire. So make sure you add him. Don't let your opponents add him. Let's talk about the next player on the list here to consider picking up. It's Tajay Spears. So he had a huge game yesterday, but it all came pretty much in the passing game. So he had 6 catches off 7 targets for 87 yards and a touchdown. Had a couple of runs. He ran in a touchdown as well, which was quite hilarious if you've not seen it. He sort of like gets lifted up and up and up, and it was you could put the soundtrack "You Raise Me Up" to the theme tune of that, and it would look really good. So, I think Spears is definitely an interesting back to own, and definitely one that I would add if you've got the space to add, because he's one of those players that could, especially in a PPR league, could potentially hurt you with this kind of usage. And especially as if they bench Will Levis and Taylor Heineke goes to that short passing game, then that's I think that's a really big one. So I would look at Tajay Spears as a nice to add, not a priority add like Jerome Ford or like the next person I'm going to talk to you about. But I definitely think he's one to definitely add. Let's talk about Kendra Miller. I talked to him with the Patreons and said he's a player I'd be grabbing. But now Kamara's tweaked his groin. I don't know what this injury kind of means. I've seen Kamara play through these before. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Saints do, because obviously they are eliminated from contention. There isn't anywhere for them to go. So you would expect them to run Kendra Miller pretty hard, because why would you risk Alvin Kamara? But then on the flip side, you have Darren Rizzi, who's playing for an NFL coaching job, and they very nearly pulled off a come-from-behind victory yesterday. The pragmatic in me says that Miller gets a significant role next week, and it should be sizable. So he's definitely worth pushing a lot of your remaining fab in for if you don't get Ford. So I'd have Ford, then I'd have Miller. But I definitely think there is a case where Miller can potentially be the better of the two. But I just don't think that they're going to just fold Alvin Kamara over just yet. But if that injury's bad, then obviously they will. So, yeah, we're doing this very early on Monday morning. So it's literally like an instant reaction. But I wanted to get this out. I wanted people to start planning their week. So the other running back here that's under 50% owned is Sasir McCormack. He hasn't gone tonight. So, but he's the lead back as we're led to believe. Obviously, we'll see what that means tonight. But at this point, I would have him third behind Ford and Miller because we know that role is a low end RB2, right? It's nice to have, but it's not essential. So I would have him there, but ahead of someone like Spears for sure. The other ads I would make, and these are purely strategic, would be Blake Corum at the running back position. He's someone that we've seen Kyron Williams. He got 29 carries on Thursday night, which is just absurd. And he's on a ridiculously high touch count. There's 2 weeks to go, so this window of injury is starting to get much, much smaller. However, I do think that's one I would be picking up and stashing. The other one is Kenneth Gainwell. Saquon Barkley did leave this game with an injury at the weekend, or yesterday or last night. And so as a result, I can see a world where Gainwell could get some more touches, especially as when you look at Philly, they've already got the playoff spot clinched, and I think they're pretty close to winning the division. I'm just checking that. I'm pretty sure they've got it almost licked in their division. Well, they're 2 games, 3 to play. So, well, no, that's enough. Yeah, they've got the division locked because they can't. Washington are 3. Well, not quite. Okay, so almost locked. They're 1 game away from winning the division. So, and they're the 2 seed. If they win out, they remain the 2 seed. Now they're in play for the 1 seed. The Lions have had a load of injuries, especially on defense as well, and they're equal records with the Lions. So they're not going to phone it in, but that push is not necessarily going to be quite as strong as if they were fighting for a playoff spot. So, they should lock the division next week. And then with that locks them, given the fact that the other 2 division winners are 8 and 6, that would lock them at least the 2 seed. So they can't fall below the 2 seed. And then it'd be a straight out race for the 1 seed. You can see a world where Gainwell would get more work, especially if there is a bit of a niggle there. So he's another one I'd be adding to the list and keeping an eye on as much as possible, because I think you're just looking for edges in this scenario right now and looking at where you can try and get a key advantage. So that's another one I would definitely look at. That's the running backs. It's the most important position. Is why I started there rather than quarterbacks. Quarterbacks are quarterbacks. Okay, at the end of the day, the 2 that I would add based on what I've just seen would be Matt Stafford. So he's close to 40% owned. And Aaron Rodgers, who looks like he is putting up some big numbers sort of end of season. But for me, I'm not really that keen on Aaron Rodgers. Just think for me, he'll have 1 good game, 2 bad games. It's just not for me really a ride I want to take, even in a Superflex league, and he's probably owned in a Superflex league because he's Aaron Rodgers. So for me, Matt Stafford looks in a 1 QB league the best pickup remaining out there. I don't really think that you need to be worrying about sort of any of these other options out there. There's just not that many quarterback streamers, and you should already have your quarterback, and I doubt many are streaming at this point. They've just settled on 1 and gone from there. Let's move to the wide receivers. Some interesting ones yesterday. Rashad Bateman sprung to life with 2 touchdowns. He caught 3 of his 5 targets for 80 yards. He sits in this sort of boom and bust world of viability, right? He's a really hard one to own in terms of putting him in the lineup, because are you really going to trust your entire league season on Rashad Bateman? it's a hard one to call because he can do nothing and he has done nothing. Having said that, he's got 8 touchdowns this season and he goes right in there with Nick Westbrook-Akine, who did blank yesterday, and MVS, who blanked the first half and then had a decent second half to kind of carry it. But I kind of sit Bateman of he's a guy that could put up double-digit fantasy points very quickly, very easily, and he's one of these few ceiling players out there on the waiver wire. There aren't many of them. There's no point in just adding a guy for a guy's sake now. You know, you'll have a stacked roster. You're in the semifinals of your fantasy league. You're not looking at Dross. You're not looking at Mojo off the street here. So for me, I'm looking at a ceiling play. He's a really interesting one. He's worth a little bit. One player I would probably be looking to grab is Jalen McMillan. So Jalen McMillan has scored 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games, but he's becoming more of a solid part of this offense. I don't know what it was, rookie nerves, couldn't find his standing. He just didn't look good for about 10 games. He looked pretty awful. Simple drops, he dropped touchdowns. It wasn't working. These last 2 weeks, he's run Chris Brutes. He's looked sharp. He's made great plays. He scored a great touchdown yesterday. And for me, he's growing in confidence every week. And the Buccaneers, with no Chris Godwin, have this sort of narrow tree where they've got this balanced attack. The only thing that goes against McMillan now is the schedule. In Dallas next week, you would sit there and think he'd probably be heavily used. Against Carolina, maybe not quite as much because they won't need to risk putting the ball in the air as much, given how good their run game is. But I like stashing Jalen McMillan. I think he's a guy that could hurt you. He's a guy who could, if the opponent picked up, there's a pathway to 15 fantasy points. And that could be enough. That could be a difference in a league. So I like Jalen McMillan. I think Jalen McMillan is worth an ad. If you've got the room to add someone like him, I definitely would. Last one is Jalen Coker. And again, he's a player kind of like in and out on all the time here. But, he caught 4 passes for 110 yards and a touchdown. And let's be honest, Carolina is just going to sling it now. They've got nothing to lose. Carolina are just going to put the ball in the air and they're just going to see what happens. And so what that really means is that he's an upside play, but he can blank. I mean, the context here is that he scored almost all of his yards on one play. It was an 83-yard touchdown. But that's what you're kind of chasing is this sort of bottled catching fire type. And again, that's where he goes in with Bateman. I'm less likely concerned that that's going to happen consistently. With 2 weeks to go, he's a player I would keep an eye on. I'd probably have him below the others. If I'm looking at these, I think McMillan's probably the top ad. Then I would probably add Bateman and then Coker. They're kind of the order of things of how I would look to pick them up, because I think for me, McMillan has a pathway to true decent numbers because he's attached to a good offense. He's a number 2 receiver in a top offense. Whereas Bateman is in a top offense and he is the 2, but there's less volume there for him. But it's still relevant because he's scoring the touchdowns. So there for me are the ones. And then the other player I would look at potentially is Quentin Johnson. I've been in and out on him. But with these injuries to Lab McConkey, he got 10 targets yesterday. And I think that's really interesting. He only caught half of them, but there's a pathway to him being relevant the last 2 weeks. So I'd keep an eye on him. Tight ends, really, there's not many to talk about. We should just stick to Brenton Strange. Unbelievable. 12 targets yesterday. Caught 11 of them. If you need a tight end, just fire it. Just put everything you got left and get Brenton Strange, especially if you've been riding Zach Ertz. He's injured, so he's a player I would be looking at. The other one I'd take is Stone Smart. Again, not a great day, but he caught 5 for 50 yesterday, and that's all you kind of need from the position. It's serviceable. So those 2 guys, and then Noah Gray scored a touchdown. I don't think I would trust him, but there's that option there if you want to go down that route. And then we get to kickers. So I looked at the strength of schedule for kickers the next couple of weeks, and realistically, if you're looking and you're in the market for a kicker, Josh Carty's schedule's not too bad. Nor is the Rams DST, and they're the DST I'd be looking to pick up for the rest of the season. They're probably it's probably the best schedule for a kicker. But if you're looking and you're chasing sort of the points, I think Arizona, and obviously Zane Gonzalez is injured, so we'll wait to see who's kind of the kicker there. But their schedule on the whole, Carolina and then LA, isn't bad. So most of the other sort of top-rated kickers are probably gone in league, so I wouldn't get too cute with this. There isn't like an elite situation here when it comes to kickers. There isn't like a secret source or secret like cheat code here, because there really isn't a lot of them. There aren't many that are playing both games indoors. Boswell's schedule's pretty decent, but I doubt he's available. And then the Warriors, you had someone like Seattle and you had Jason Myers, but actually, if there's no Geno, then really there's no points. And then away in Chicago in week 17, that has all the makings of a potential snow day. So I'd stay away from that one. So there isn't loads of sort of great options here in the kicking front for the next 2 weeks. If you're looking for just this week coming, then, you could look at a few different teams here. Looking at potential players on bye. So Denver, that looks like a pretty decent option, and you could go with that. You could look at the Panthers against Arizona. It's not the worst place. And then Tampa week 17. But again, how many points do you think Carolina are going to score? Not necessarily sure. I want to put my fantasy title hopes on the Carolina kicker. And this is what I mean. And we're looking at sort of best options here. So Josh Carty makes a good case. It's probably one of the better ones out there. That's kind of the best options. And then, DST definitely falls the same way in terms of the Rams. They have a pretty good schedule over the next 2 weeks, and you can feel pretty comfortable picking them up. I've talked to Arizona quite a lot. Again, they got the Carolina Panthers, so that'll be one you're definitely intrigued with. The Falcons against the Giants, that's a pretty good matchup as well that you could try and target and get fantasy points from. And then if we're looking at situations where there could be a sort of rookie quarterback in, or situations where there's some struggles, Green Bay against New Orleans could be a decent situation there. It looks like it'll be Spencer Rattler going forward. Or if there is an issue with Seattle, or it'd be Minnesota, which they're pretty much owned. So I doubt you'll get Minnesota out there. If you should, just pick them up. That'd be your best option going forward. And I like Jacksonville's run. I think Jacksonville, I know they should have done a bit better yesterday, but they got the Raiders and then Tennessee. So I like their schedule as well. So there's a few sort of options for you. Last thing on injuries. Look, it's really early. I'm not a doctor. So I'm not going to sit here and proclaim that I know what I'm talking about here, but I'll go into some of the sort of key injuries and my initial thoughts. Patrick Mahomes and this ankle injury, right? He had this before. It's a recurring problem. He's played through it before. He's won a Super Bowl with it before. Do I think Patrick Mahomes plays next week? Yeah. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I don't have his access, but if everything we're being told is this is a pretty similar injury to what he's had before and he's played through it, is anything going to change? I don't think so. I think you'll see Patrick Mahomes next week. Saquon Barkley, I think you'll probably see next week as well, but just keep an eye on that one. I don't think you'll see Jalen Waddle next week. You won't see Nick Chubb because he's got a broken foot. But I do think the Alvin Kamara one is the one that I don't really have a clear sense on. It's a groin injury. I've seen those be played on. I've seen them be sat out. It really depends on the severity of the discomfort of it. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what that kind of looks like. So we'll follow it through the week. Hopefully Stocks and I'll be back tomorrow night and we'll take you through everything we need to do for semi-finals week. I'm going to drop a Patreon cast after this. Now you can join the Patreon for free. You can take a trial. Listen to the Patreon cast. I'm going to go through and map out how you win your league. It's really that straightforward. So join the Patreon cast. Join Patreon for free now. Patreon.com/5yard rush. Until then, Rush Nation, see you tomorrow. Apologies for no pods last week. I'm sure you all did great without my dulcet tones, and apologies for the voice on this one. Resting it. I've got the tea here and we'll keep going. But until then, Rush Nation, don't forget, as always, keep rushing.